If you're in search of an easy way to add height to your 2021 or newer Bronco that won't require completely replacing your current suspension or your comfortable factory ride quality, this BroncBuster 1.5-inch billet aluminum suspension lift kit will be a great option to consider. And I do want to mention that this will not fit the Raptor model, so just keep that in mind when checking this kit out. But for all other models, this is going to be a great way to sharpen up the look of your Bronco with a mild height increase, fit a larger tire in the wheel well, and get some better clearance if you do plan on taking your Bronco off-road. Now, while getting an increase in height, like I said, this will also keep your factory feel and performance if you intend to retain the comfortable ride quality while getting a small boost in height that's not going to require all the work of a full suspension kit. These spacers here will install on the top of your shock and strut assemblies, lifting your truck on all four corners 1.5 inches to give enough height to make a difference visually and functionally. Now, while the height increase will be more subtle than other lift kits, it will make a difference, allowing your Bronco to clear a 35-inch tire and clear obstacles better if you are taking your Bronco off-road. Now, I do want to mention that if you do have a more aggressive offset or tire tread when it comes to a 35, that you may have to do some minor trimming, but for the most part, 35s will fit with no other modifications needed. Now, regardless, it will be much more straightforward than other more inclusive lift kits, adding the height and generally maintaining that factory ride, which will benefit you if you're sticking mainly to the street. These will have a full billet aluminum build being cut to factory spec for a direct bolt-in construction and will be tough enough to take the pressure of your suspension system over time. Now, on top, we'll have a glossed anodized finish to protect from corrosion even in harsher conditions. Now, these spacers do physically measure out to 1.5 inches and with the spring compression and suspension geometry after the installation, the end result will be a true 1.5-inch lift. It will also come with all of the required hardware and again will be completely bolt on to the factory struts with no modifications for a hassle-free install. Now, what you see here is going to cost you about $450, making this a pricier spacer lift, but for good reason considering the quality in the build. Now, when comparing this to other less expensive choices, this will have a one-piece billet build that is machined to the OE strut spec, while others may take a different approach like a collar or preload spacer style lift that's going to require a bit more when it comes to the installation. Now, it's also going to keep it much more simple and straightforward compared to a full strut replacement, so if you know you want a smaller lift that's not going to change much but the height on your Bronco, then this is going to be a great pick for you. Install here will require a mechanical experience in order to get the job done, so I'm going to give it a 3 out of 3 wrenches on the difficulty meter, taking you about 4 hours, give or take, with the right tools and setup. Now, at this point, we can head over to our shop and check out a detailed breakdown on how you can install this on your Bronco, whether you are tackling this job yourself or you're just curious about how this installs. So that's going to wrap it up for my review. Let's go ahead and jump into the install.
For this install, you need a 3/8 impact and ratchet, a pry bar, a 27, 24, 18, 15, 15 swivel, 6 Allen and T40 socket, a 21, 18 and 15 millimeter wrench, Phillips head screwdriver, clip removal tool, and a hammer, and also not shown be a lift and pull jacks. All right, today we're going to be putting a lift kit on our Bronco, so let's get started. All right, now we're going to get working on our front suspension. Now for the front, we are actually going to drop the back of our front lower control arm. We're going to take our 2 eccentric bolts out. Now, you will obviously need to get in alignment after this. You're going to need to do that anyway with lifting the vehicle. All right, now we're going to start by taking our lower sway bar link mount out of either lower control arm, and then we're going to remove our sway bar completely. That'll allow us to get this rear eccentric bolt out. So we'll start here with our 21 millimeter nut. So we're going to grab our 21 millimeter wrench to go on our nut here, and we're going to grab our ratchet with our 6 millimeter Allen socket to hold the inside of the stud from spinning. So break that free. You can actually just spin it out with the ratchet itself. Once you have that loose, take the nut completely off, then go ahead and do the same thing for the other sway bar link. Now we just need to disconnect our electrical components for our sway bar disconnect here. So we have a clip on either side that we're going to pop off our motor for our harness. So we're going to grab our clip removal tool, pop that out. Do the same thing on the other side. And then we have 2 electrical connectors on either side. They're just in different spots, but they're just the same. So push down. Actually, there is a white release tab on the bottom one. So pull that out. And then push down and pull out. Same thing for the top one. And then disconnect the other 2 on the other side. So now that we have our sway bar out of the way, we're gonna come to our lower control arm and take our 2 nuts off for the lower mount for our strut. So we're gonna grab our impacted 18mm socket, take these 2 off. Now we're gonna get our eccentric bolts out of our lower control arm. So I'm gonna grab my impact and 24mm socket to take off our nut. And I have our 21mm wrench to hold the head. Now I did mark our eccentric bolts in the location that they are, just so when you go back together, you can get a roundabout location so it's not too far off. We're just gonna zip these out right now. All right, if you need to, just grab a hammer, just tap it out. All right, so we'll just take our washer off our front side. Should be able to get our bolt out. We're just gonna do the same thing for the front one. All right, so our lower control arm is hitting this back shield right here. So we're just gonna take that out of the way. We're gonna loosen our 2 front bolts here and then take our 2 rear ones completely out. It's our MBR impact and 15mm socket. All right, now our control arm should come down out of the way. All right, now that that's out of the way, we can lower our vehicle and take our top mount off. All right, now you can go ahead and do the same thing on the other side of the truck with the lower control arm to get this down out of the way, just so you have to keep going up and down with the lift. So we'll get the other side out, and then we'll come back and take our top mount out. All right, so now that we got this lowered, we're gonna grab our 15mm ratcheting wrench. We're gonna take 2 of our nuts completely off, and then we'll take our last one off while holding the strut, just so it doesn't fall out on us. All right, now that those 2 are off, we'll take this one off and make sure that we hold this so it doesn't fall down on us when we get to the end. All right, we're just gonna feed that down through in between the axle and the tie rod. All right, now that you have that out, you can go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. All right, now to fit our bigger tires, we are gonna need to take out the front and rear crash bars. We're gonna start in the rear here. We're gonna grab our impact and 15mm swivel socket and get these out. And just pull that straight out. All right, now the front might be a little bit more difficult. We're gonna start by taking our 2 bolts out and then just seeing how far we can get this out before we need to touch the front bumper. So we're gonna grab our 15mm ratcheting wrench, take these 2 out. All right, now that these are loose, should be able to just take them out easily by hand. All right, as you see, we're hitting the bumper here. So we just need to start loosening the parts of the bumper up here. All right, we're gonna loosen this outer shell here. So we're gonna loosen our bolts here, 2 on top, there are 2 on the inside here. We're gonna grab our impact and T40 socket. Just be careful not to strip these out. Now we're just gonna loosen this and see how much movement we get. Hopefully we get enough. Got some movement in that. You just pull that straight out. And we're just gonna tighten these bolts back down, and we can go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. All right, now we're just gonna tighten all our bolts back up. All right, then you go repeat the same thing on the other side of the truck for the front and rear crash bar. All right, now I'm gonna fish this up through in between the tie rod and the axle. Just one thing you wanna make note of, the reservoir, you just wanna make sure it faces the inside of the vehicle. Now, since these studs are offset, we will need to spin the bottom. That's not a big deal. Get that there and just let it rest on our control arm while we get our studs lined up. Get our supplied nuts, thread them on. Now if you can't get that on, grab a pry bar, just go into 2 studs at the bottom, just turn, because our reservoir is hitting the axle down there. That'll allow us to raise it up more. We're gonna grab our 15mm ratcheting wrench and tighten these 3 down. All right, now that these 3 are all tightened, we can go ahead and do the same thing for the other strut. We'll get our truck back up in the air and get our lower control arm into place. All right, as you can see, I did get our lower control arm. I just put it over our bottom studs for our strut. Just simply slides over. We're gonna get a couple of pull jacks and jack it up into place on the subframe. Since it is taller, it is a little bit more of a struggle than coming out. We're just gonna thread our nuts on down here, just as a little added security so that nothing comes out. All right, now we're gonna get our lower control arm in place. We're gonna use 2 pull jacks to help get it up in position. Just because it is a little bit taller, it's just a little bit harder to get this in place. I threaded our 2 nuts on the bottom of our studs on our strut, just to help keep everything in place. So we'll slowly just start to jack this up, alternating from side to side, and get it into position. All right, now we got our front bolt in, we'll get our back one in. We can get our eccentric and nut on both of our bolts and tighten them down. We'll grab our impact and 24mm socket and 21mm wrench. If we need to, just adjust it to where it was. All right, if you need to, just give this one a little tap, get it seated all the way. Get everything lined up with the marks that you made. Now we just have our 2 nuts for our strut at the bottom. We're gonna grab our impact and 18mm socket, tighten those down. Now once you have this side all put back together, you can go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. All right, now I got our buddy. We're gonna get our sway bar back into place. So just make sure you get your ends in first. And get our hardware loosely installed, and we'll come back and tighten it all. All right, now we're gonna grab our impact and 18mm socket and tighten down our nut and bolt on either side. Let's go ahead and do the same thing for the other side. Now we just have our tie rod end nuts. We're gonna thread them on. Grab our 21mm ratchet and our ratchet with our 6mm Allen and tighten them down. All right, let's go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. Now we just need to plug in our electrical connectors on our sway bar. We have 2 on either side. Make sure on the 2 you secure down that white locking tab. And then secure your harness out of the way. All right, now we just need to get our belly pans back into place. We're gonna slide them into our front bolts, get our 2 rear ones and thread them in. We'll grab our impact and 15mm socket and tighten all those down. All right, and then we just have our rear cover. We'll slide that over those 2 bolts. Thread our 2 rear ones in. And same thing, impact and 15mm socket, tighten all those down. All right, now we're gonna come back to the rear and get our rear strut out. Now we're just gonna take our bottom bolt out first. So we're gonna grab our impact with a 27mm socket and go on our head and take this bolt out. As you see, I do have a pull jack supporting our rear axle. Just able to raise and lower just to get tension off that bolt. So now we have no tension on that bolt. Pull that out. You can actually let this down all the way. Now we're gonna go up top and disconnect from up top. In order to gain access to the top of our strut, we just have to pull back our wheel liner a little bit. Now you can take this out completely if you want to make it a little bit easier for yourself. We're just going to take this one out and just pull it back. So you grab a Phillips head screwdriver and take this middle insert out. Now I will say these type of clips do not like to come out easily. So just take your time. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. They like to spin. Once you get that out, you'll be able to lift this up and gain access to our top nuts. All right, now we're gonna do the same thing as you did at the front, same 3 15mm nuts on top. So grab our 15mm ratcheting wrench. We're gonna take the 2 off first, and then we'll take the last one off and hold the strut at the same time. All right, so I'm gonna get the inside 2 off, and then we'll leave that outside one last. All right, once you get that loosened up, you just lift up and it should be able to spin off by hand. Just pull that straight out the bottom. Now we're just gonna need to install our spacer on our factory strut. So same thing, do not mix up the hardware. You want factory hardware on the factory studs because they are a different thread pitch. All right, we're gonna grab our impact and 15mm thin wall socket and tighten these down. All right, now we can reinstall this in the truck. All right, now we're gonna get our strut into place. Now it's the same thing as the front. So since we have our spacer on here, everything is offset slightly. So we're just gonna get lined up best we can for right now. Get one stud on if we can. You can let that hang and then we're gonna rotate the bottom here with a pry bar. All right, now as you can see, this is off of our mounting point. So we're just gonna take a pry bar, go in here, just rotate it the angle that we need. Just make sure that this is facing towards the front of the vehicle. And we'll go back up top and secure our studs. So now that that is in a proper position, we can push it up and get the rest of our nuts on. Get them all started, then we'll tighten them down with our 15mm ratcheting wrench. All right, now we're just gonna put our clip back in. Just push that into place. We can go underneath and secure our bolt. Now we just need to get our bolt back through. Now you're just gonna need to push forward and pull down on the axle at the same time. It's a little tricky with one person, but you can get it done. Let's give this a little tap with our hammer. Grab our impact with our 27mm socket, put our nut on the end, get it started, and then tighten it down. Now you can go ahead and do the same thing for the other side. And that wraps up our install of our BroncBuster 1.5-inch billet aluminum suspension lift kit for our 2021 and newer Bronco, excluding the Raptor. And remember, for everything Bronco, keep it right here at ExtremeTerrain.com.